The full name of ISIS is Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. It is a theocracy, proto-state, and a Salafi or Wahhabi group. Its ideology represents a radical Salafi Islam, which is a strict form of the Sunni Islam. Ultimately, the terrorist group claims that they want to build a caliphate to rule the world, fulfilling an apocalyptic prophecy of a battle between jihadis and infidel armies, which they see as the West. The group began in 2004 as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, before rebranding as ISIS 2 years later. It was an ally of and had similarities with Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda. Both were radical anti-Western militant groups devoted to establishing an independent Islamic State in the region. But ISIS, unlike Al-Qaeda, which has disowned the group in early 2014, has proven to be more brutal and more effective at controlling territory it has seized. Unlike normal terrorist groups, ISIS would put governing structures in place to rule the territories of the area that they conquered. So once the dust settled, they would put in cabinet and governors and financial and legislative bodies. This bureaucratic hierarchy looks a lot like those of some of the Western countries whose value it rejects, if you take away the democracy and add in a council to consider who should be beheaded. In early January 2014, ISIS take control of Fallujah and most of Ramadi, both cities in the Anbar province that are Sunni strongholds and are major battlegrounds during the US-led war in Iraq. The ISIS also seized control of Mosul in northern Iraq in early June 2014, dealing the government an enormous and unexpected blow. The militants released the insurgents from prison, loot banks, and occupy an airport. This allowed them to gain a major stronghold in their fight against the governing bodies, and thus gained them a very strong and firm grip on their territory. Hence, the start of a very large, violent, and some might deem more successful campaign than their other terrorist counterparts.
ISIS were not always at the forefront of global politics, but they worked their way into conversations of governments all over the world. In my eyes, there were two main reasons for this. One, being their more frequent attacks on Western soil, and the other being their use of technology. ISIS have shadowed Al-Qaeda both in size and strength, establishing a large number of supporters globally, and this gave rise to atrocious attacks, not only locally but also further afield. ISIS claimed responsibility for the 2017 attack on Manchester Arena, killing 22 and injuring 59, and the Belgium airport attack, killing 32 and injuring 340. This generated lots of publicity in the West as governments sought to protect and prevent this happening again, giving way to conversations over ISIS and how to deal with them. This helped put them at the centre of global politics. ISIS also targeted Westerners, who were working in their territories and generated propaganda videos using them. Perhaps one of the more famous cases is that of James Foley, an American journalist who was beheaded on camera. This video sent shocks through the world, and David Cameron, Prime Minister at the time, was pressured into taking action after hearing the British accent of the executioner. Not only was it the politicians that felt the need for action, ISIS's use of technology meant that 80 to 90% of videos like this were available on Twitter for the public and supporters to see. This left the public outrage and more pressure was put on governments, placing ISIS at the front of global politics. Ronan Gunatra, an analyst of terrorist trends, said ISIS's use of technology was so advanced, Boko Haram, who were still using low-quality cameras, paid them to generate sophisticated videos. ISIS's more frequent attacks on the West and effective use of technology has therefore placed them at the centre of global politics.
There are many reasons for the success of ISIS over the years. Until March 2019, ISIS had recruited thousands of young people from the West, with a high proportion being women. In July 2018, the number of Western foreign fighters and civilians who joined ISIS had estimated at up to 41,490 people, with 4,761 being women and 4,640 minors. Possible reasons for joining may have included a search for a new identity and the excitement and fulfillment of optimism that came along with this. Women and girls' reasons for being drawn to the organization are assumed to revolve around the same factors as men's: alienation, inequality, adventure, and the attraction of a supposedly noble cause. Women sympathetic to ISIS deliberately seek to challenge modern Western-imposed gender norms, and furthermore emphasize their rejection of Western feminism. For ISIS, women who join the organization are free to live Islamic lives without the restrictions of Western laws, and such narratives are an important driver of female radicalization. In addition to this, ISIS has successfully used the platform of social media to recruit teenage girls online. Due to the fact that the typical profile of an ISIS recruit is a young, second or third generation immigrant living in a Western country, many have found the arguments of these religious movements very convincing, given the numerous accounts of fundamentalist Islam that have already been developing for more than 40 years.
Shamima Begum was 15 years old when she left the UK with two of her classmates from East London. She's now 19, 9 months pregnant, and lives in a refugee camp in northern Syria. She had two other children who died as infants from malnutrition and illness. Begum told the British newspaper The Times she had no regrets moving to Syria, but she can't endure it anymore. Here's more of her conversation with the paper.
Yeah, it actually really did. It was like a normal life. The life that they show on the propaganda videos, it's a normal life. But every now and then there are bombs and stuff.
Did you ever see executions?
No, no, but I saw a beheaded head in the bin.
In the bins?
Yeah, it's really grim.
What was that like when you first saw that? These are the heads of captives?
Yeah, didn't faze me at all. I have to think about my baby as well. After my two kids died, now I'm really overprotective of this baby. I'm scared that this baby's going to get sick in this camp. That's why I really want to get back to Britain, because I know it will be taken care of. Quite health-wise, at least.
How was it losing two children so close to each other? You can't have been left unfazed by that.
It was really, it came as a shock. It just came out of nowhere. And it was so hard.
ISIS has a global and local impact around the world. In 2015, ISIS expanded into a network of affiliates in at least 8 other countries. Its branches, supporters, and affiliates increasingly carried out attacks beyond the borders of its so-called caliphate. On November 13, 130 people were killed and more than 300 injured in a series of coordinated attacks in Paris. And in June 2016, a gunman who pledged support to ISIS killed at least 4 dozen people at a nightclub in Orlando, Florida. 3 years of occupation by ISIS and a protracted military intervention to retake the area have left the once thriving old cities, Mosul in Iraq and Al-Raqqa in Syria. They were totally devastated by conflict and explosive contamination. The old cities is now deserted, covered in millions of tons of rubble strewn with thousands of explosive devices deliberately left behind by ISIS. From the humanitarian side, in Iraq, 5.8 million Iraqis displaced between 2014 and 2017. Nearly 4 million have returned to their homes, while others wait for their neighborhoods, schools, and markets to be cleared of deadly explosive devices. In Syria, it is estimated that 9 million people have been displaced from their homes as a consequence of the war. In addition, 3 million have fled Syria, while a further 6 million have been internally displaced. Today, ISIS has left a mass destruction. The massive influx of refugees, the decline in agriculture outputs, and the global escalation of violence, all associated with the Islamic State's control of areas in Iraq and the Levant.
ISIS's ability to raise significant funds through taxation, extortion, and exploiting oil and gas resources in Iraq and Syria have been crushed, and also ISIS's slaughter and enslavement of innocents, their genocide of religious minorities like Christians and Yazidis, their exploitation of child soldiers, and the use of rape as a weapon of war have been stopped. ISIS is down, but it's not out. It needs to be prevented from reconstituting itself as a fighting force in Iraq and Syria, and it should be kept from leveraging its international networks to recover from their crushing defeat, because it is evolving in order to stay alive. There should be some approaches in order to stop ISIS from evolving. The first approach is to have a global campaign which would focus on confronting ISIS branches and networks around the world, while consolidating ISIS's territorial defeat in the court. To accomplish this, there needs to be a pivot from a strategy that relies largely on military force to one that includes a broader mix of instruments, especially civilian counter-terrorism capabilities. The second approach is to prosecute ISIS. Law enforcement is a key counter-terrorism tool. As an ISIS network grows more diffuse, civilian criminal justice finishes will grow more important. Countries need to successfully respond to, investigate, and prosecute ISIS figures for the crimes they've committed, no matter where they're located. The third approach is to secure the borders. The approach is to harden the borders to prevent terrorist travel and disrupt facilitation routes. ISIS seeks to exploit gaps in border security, particularly FTFs who are fleeing the battlefield. Since 2015, some 1,200 ISIS fighters are estimated to have gone home to Europe. Likewise, hundreds of FTFs have traveled back to Southeast Asia, and other terrorists who have been inspired by ISIS are looking to cross international borders. The last approach is to cut off the flow of money. The coalition has done a lot to stop the flow of money to ISIS core, but more force needs to be done to squeeze ISIS affiliates around the world. One of the most effective financial weapons is terrorist designations. Designations isolate and expose adversaries, making it harder for them to raise money and move it through the international financial system. Responsible banks do a lot of this work as they want to keep terrorists from tainting the networks.
ISIS is a group that is known as one of the most dangerous in today's society, and a lot can be done to stop them, but everything that has been tried so far has not worked. But what needs to be done is big countries such as the United States, who have states like Washington, need to open up and reinforce and refocus the now formidable counter-terrorism apparatus on a new target. However, this now formidable counter-terrorism apparatus only works on defeating or lessening the terror of Al-Qaeda's. ISIS is not that. In one of Barack Obama's speeches, he drew a straight line between these two groups, and he said that ISIS is a terrorist organization, pure and simple. This was mistaken because ISIS hardly fits that description, and everyone else in America, the UK, other countries all believe that ISIS is not a terrorist organization at all. It has been said that if the counter-terrorism apparatus does not work, then big countries with big military forces may have to help the society with maybe calming down ISIS or destroying them once and for all.